Hello people, my name is Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie. Elsewhere on this channel, I am ranking and reviewing the Frank Zappa tours. I only have 2 left, started at 26, heading towards number 1. And since no one thought it would be a good idea for me to stop right before I did number 2 and like do some other video, I'm going to stop right before I get to number 2 and do some related to the top 2 video and discuss Little Feat. There were only 2 tours left. If you're familiar with Frank and you've been following my list, you know which 2 tours those are. And if you've watched, say, more than 5 random videos, you know the order in which they're going to come. There are no surprises there to give away that. Sorry. But in getting to this point, I've been listening to a lot of live stuff from bands but from shows that feature 2 members of Little Feat. The original bass player for the Mothers of Invention, and Lowell George. The original bass player for the Mothers of Invention was there since the beginning. And then Lowell George joined in 68, left right before the halfway point, around the halfway point of 69. Why he left, there are different stories as to why. Frank did ultimately sort of break up the Mothers shortly after that, so who knows what was going on in the band. But stories have been said that Lowell George wrote the song Willin', which he recorded and put on their first Little Feat album, showed it to Frank, and either Frank was so impressed, he was like, you need to go start your own band, or was upset that there were words, weed, whites, and wine in there, weed, whites, and wine, and said, I don't want a druggie in my band, which seems kind of stupid. I don't know, or who knows. All I know is in interviews, Lowell George has said Willin' was the reason he ultimately left the Mothers of Invention, though I don't think he exactly clarified why. I'd like to think Frank just recognized a genius songwriter and said, go be a genius on your own. I got my own material. But anyways, so he and someone named Bill Payne started Little Feat. They got this amazing drummer, Richie Hayward. They got the bass player, original bass player for the Mothers. They recorded 2 albums of like country, blues, folk, indie, rock, just kind of really weird, good kind of psyche, folk, rock, country, blues, awesomeness, highlighting Lowell George's amazing voice. Not necessarily like what he can do singing-wise, but just the character and the depth and just the sound of his voice. And then his amazing songwriting, incredible lyrics. They did 2 albums. The original bass player left. They got a new bass player, a percussionist, added another guitar player, kind of got a New Orleans funk sound for 2 almost perfect albums. And then they kind of went to a new jazz fusion thing for their last 3 albums. And then Lowell George, the band broke up. Lowell George passed away. I'm only going to be talking about the 7 albums they made with Lowell George. They did reform in the late 80s. I tried to get into them. I did not like the new sound. It was just a little too clean, too generic. The songwriting was nowhere near as interesting as what Lowell George was writing. Saw them open for the Dead a couple times in that era. And at one of the shows, the bass player of Little Feat not only winked at my girlfriend, but he also shot her. And that was a little too much cheese, even for someone like myself who loves cheese. So, yeah, I never got into the 88 and on, the post-Lowell George Little Feat, so I will not be mentioning those albums at all. All I'm going to do is tell you I'm going to rank and list my the top 7, the 7 they made while Lowell George was alive. So, yeah, here we go on to number 7. Number 7 is Down on the Farm. This was released. The band broke up while recording this. Lowell George then had a heart attack. They said it was from I guess, a cocaine OD, essentially. So the album wasn't completed, but most of it, I guess they had enough to complete it. So they did, and then they released it. And I think the worst thing you can say about this album, it's just kind of completely forgettable. It's not bad. It's definitely almost a very radio-friendly version of like their jazz fusion, New Orleans funk, almost like a Boz Scaggs type thing, like a Silk Degrees, but with nowhere near the quality of writing in the songs. I think the first 2 tracks, I think there's like 9 tracks total. The first 2 tracks, Down on the Farm, a Paul Barrere number. He was the guitarist that joined after the first 2 albums. Once he joined, him and Payne started writing more and more, which is Lowell George kind of became more disassociated from the band. They didn't get along. And as Lowell George sort of receded into the shadows, I think the qualities of the albums went down. But the opening track, Down on the Farm, is kind of a fun, good little jam, Barrere number, and then written by him, and then 6 Feet of Snow, a Hank Snow tribute, the most straight up countryish thing they've ever done. Follows, and it's a Lowell George wrote it with Keith Godchow of the Dead, and it almost sounds like maybe when he was producing Terrapin Station, I think he produced, maybe when he was producing that, like Godchow was like, dude, they don't want this song. Do you want this song? And then they recorded it. Kind of sounds like that. But it's a fun little country number that I actually think the Dead would have done really a good job of performing had Godchow been able to get it into their repertoire. But other than that, everything on the album is just kind of forgettable. Front Page News is a song on here that they kind of played live a lot. There's kind of a good jamming version of that on this Hoy Hoy kind of compilation release that they did after that. I'll just talk about that at the end of the video. But other than that, it's just kind of, it's not bad. It's got some good grooves. Anytime Lowell sings, it's good. But for the most part, it's just kind of a forgettable album. It's one of those that if you like the first four and really appreciate the first four, you're going to want to check out just to make sure a melody doesn't hit you. But other than that, avoid this until you realize whether or not you like Little Feat. Number 6, Time Loves a Hero. This came out in 1977. It also is kind of, its main problem is it's just kind of forgettable. It is their second to last album. So kind of the last one they did when they were actually still together as a group. It leans a lot more towards that jazz fusion-y thing. There's a longer track called, I think, A Day at the Dog Races. Day at the Dog Races, which already you've lost me. Why are you at the dog races? It's an instrumental, and it's a long, lengthy, jammy number that's just kind of not that inspired. I don't think really goes anywhere interesting, but it's kind of a new direction that kind of doesn't really intrigue me. There's a couple okay songs on here. I think Rocket in My Pocket, a Lowell George number, has a little bit of that Lowell George, just kind of weird funkiness seeps in, but it's second-rate Lowell George. Red Streamliner, again, that song kind of identifies the problem with the band. They're like this streamlined, a little too slick. Just, yeah, they can play some funk and they can dip into some jazz jams, but there's just nothing really inspired about this album that to me makes it stand out. It's just, again, it's like Down on the Farm, a little bit stronger material, some good Lowell George singing, a couple memorable hooks and playing, but for the most part, just kind of forgettable. And then there's some cringe stuff like Old Folks Boogie. That's just not a good title. Keeping Up with the Joneses, just a bad concept. Rockin' in My Pocket works because it's a Lowell George concept. High Roller's an okay opener, mainly because I think George sings it, but it's a Brer song. But still, yeah, kind of just another forgettable album. So, yeah, not that good. 6, Time Loves a Hero. Number 5, the last record album, which it was not for them. This is their 5th album. They've definitely started to slide into jazz fusion territory. Lowell's starting to separate himself from the band. But this is still, I think, a pretty solid album. Definitely a notch below the first 4 albums, but I still think there's some really strong stuff from here, some pretty memorable performances. It's kind of worth checking out if you like the first 4. I definitely don't think it's better than any of those, but it's definitely a notch above the last 2. All That You Dream, a Barrere Payne song that they wrote together, is probably definitely their best thing they wrote together. It's got a really this dun 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 dun, this funky, propulsive, kind of forward-moving, like restlessness about it that just works perfectly. There is an amazing version of it in which Linda Ronstadt sings on Hoy Hoy, that compilation album that was performed after Lowell George passed away at like a memorial for him, and that version is ridiculous. Linda Ronstadt just kills it. But this version is really good. Good vocal by Lowell George. Long Distance Love, kind of a cliche song, but Lowell's vocal performance is amazing. And Day or Night, the end of side 1 is this kind of long 6.5 minutes, which is long for Little Feat, kind of a jazz fusion jam that even at one point like fades off and then comes back in, and it shouldn't work, but I don't know why. I kind of like it. This one, there was a little bit of inspiration in this, and it worked. So I don't have a complaint about that. And then the second side of the album, One Love Stand is a pretty good song. Down Below the Borderline is kind of sounds like we've been here before. And then the closer, Mercenary Territory. It's a really good, just really good hook in it. And Lowell George sings it. It's just another kind of a beautiful song. So it's not a bad album. I would say All That You Dream, Mercenary Territory, even Day or Night, the jazz fusion are pretty solid tracks. And it's not that bad. Definitely not as good as the next four, but I would say a solid album. Yeah. The last record album. Number 4, Dixie Chicken. This should be higher because the first side A of this album, side 1, the first 5 songs, if you're streaming it or listening to it on CD, is a perfect side of music. It is kind of a slow New Orleans, well seeped and simmered funk. I don't think there's any tracks that really accelerate or get too fast, but it burns a slow funk the entire first side. Seconds, and they're all either Lowell George songs or there's a cover of an Alan Toussaint song. So like the writing is impeccable. Side B just kind of falters. There's a cover of a Fred Tackett song, a guitar player who would then join the band later in the 80s and 90s in that reboot version. There's a Paul Barrere, Bill Payne song, Walking All Night, which just, I think, doesn't even sound like it belongs on the same album. Fat Man in the Bathtub by Lowell George, an almost perfect song, smack dab in the middle of a pretty weak side 2, kind of saves that side. That's a really, really good song. And then you get Juliet, which is kind of forgettable George song, and then an instrumental called Lafayette Railroad, which is just a little anticlimactic after where this album starts off on side A. But side A is almost perfect. Dixie Chicken opens it. That is, if you have not listened to Dixie Chicken and listened to the words of Dixie Chicken, the lyrics of that are just a perfect snapshot of Lowell George's storytelling ability. I'm going to give away what it is now. If you don't want to know what the song's about and you want to be surprised, pause the video now. Go listen to Dixie Chicken. I'm sure it's on YouTube, which is where you're watching this, right? And then come back. Because the first verse, he meets this girl, night out in Memphis. I think he's in Memphis. I'm out in Memphis, yeah, at the Commodore Hotel. And then they're getting along, and the happier she gets, she starts singing this song. And the song she sings is, "If you be my Dixie Chicken," the chorus to the song. So then the second verse comes, and they've been partying all night, having a great time. He doesn't remember when they got married or when he bought that house. All he remembers is, the way she would say his name and sing, "If you be my Dixie Chicken," okay? So obviously things are going well. Little solo, we get the third verse. Sometime later, she ran off with a guitar player, somebody, right? She ran off with somebody. And then he goes to a bar to drown away his sorrows, the same bar he happened to meet her at. And the bartender pours him a drink and starts humming, "If you see my Dixie Chicken." And when he starts humming it, all the boys, they begin to hum along because they've all been burned by this temptress. It's a great, great song. And I felt the need to explain it. I don't know why. But the other songs on this side, Two Trains, an amazing Lowell George original. Roll 'Em Easy, a really slow burn, kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, a really slow burn atmospheric funk. On Your Way Down, an awesome Alan Toussaint cover, and then Kiss It Off, another just great slow burn, kind of George, just even spacier type song. Just brilliant. Brilliant songs. No, Roll 'Em Easy is more like an acoustic thing. Kiss It Off is the weird spacey thing. But they're both really slow, tender, almost perfect songs. Yeah. Number 4, Dixie Chicken. Number 3, Sailing Shoes. This is their second album, the one after their first, the second of sort of their quartet phase. They start to inch a little towards more of that funk exploratory territory. It's a nice, sweet kind of little jam in the final track on here. They have a couple little rockers. It's a weird album. It has one of the tracks from the first album kind of in a more streamlined, better version, like he's been playing it live for a while. Now he's got the phrasing down better. The song Willin', which would kind of become their Little Feat's sort of iconic number apart from Dixie Chicken. And then two other songs that are on here, Cold, Cold, Cold and Tripe Face Boogie, would reappear on another album together as like one jammy set piece, which at the time they weren't doing that live. At the time they were doing Cold, Cold, Cold into Dixie Chicken, then into Tripe Face Boogie, but they took out the Dixie Chicken on the next album and combined those other two and gave them a more funk footing. Didn't change the songs much, but they work really together on that other album. But here you get sort of the earlier, rawer versions of them. This is still a great album. Like these final four albums, Dixie Chicken, this, and the next two, are just perfect, almost perfect albums. If there's any complaints, it's the repeat of these songs, and then an A Political Blues, just another blues number, kind of like they did on the first album, which I haven't yet discussed, which I don't go to Little Feat for my blues. It's like ordering enchiladas at an Italian food restaurant. They might be good, but that's not why I'm here. You know, give me your songwriting, give me your weird little Texas funk, your West Coast funk. You're just like, not Texas funk. There's a song in here about Texas on the first album that is just so beautifully Texas. And a song on this album about Texas, Texas Rose Cafe, that is definitely one of the highlights of this album. So I have Texas on my mind. But that weird sort of singer-songwriter country-ish thing he does on these early albums is why I'm here. But this has some good memorable album songs, Easy to Slip, Trouble, a nice little kind of ballad, Willin', an amazing little ballad, Sailing Shoes, a funky little Lowell George, just weird little number, Got No Shadow and Cat Fever from Bill Payne. Those are his contributions. Cat Fever's kind of forgettable, but Got No Shadow is excellent song. And then the closing song, Texas Rose Cafe, is not only just one of Lowell George's best lyrics, but the closing line is just perfect. Absolute perfect commentary on the times, on the Vietnam War, on being in America, on just everything. It is such a killer last line. And the way he delivers it, just beautiful. Yeah. Number 3, Sailing Shoes. 2, Little Feat, their debut album. The first 2 songs on here right out of the gate are just ridiculous. Snakes on Everything, which is a Bill Payne number, and then Strawberry Flats, which is a Lowell George and Payne number. Just hit it out of the ballpark from the beginning. Just country, blues, rock, weirdness, strange lyrics, a little jammy edge, just a really awesome sound. Just some really good. There is, again, like on the first album, on the last album I talked about, there's like a blues jam in the middle that kind of is a distraction. This one is 44 blues into how many more years? 6.5 minutes. It's way too long. It doesn't need to be here. However, Snakes on Everything, which opens, Strawberry Flats, Truck Stop Girl, Brides of Jesus, Willin'. I mean, that's the first 5 songs. They're all incredible. Hamburger Midnight's a little like fun, raucous little thing that Lowell George wrote with the bass player. But then you get to side 2, you get that blues thing over with. Crack in Your Door is another Lowell George classic. I've Been the One, a tenderer thing, but absolutely awesome. Taking My Time, a Payne number that's pretty good. And then Crazy Captain Gumboat Willie, which is just kind of a silly, fun, almost like musical type number, but with Lowell George lyrics, and just a great debut album. But yeah, those first 2 songs just hit it out of the ballpark from the beginning, and from there, whatever they do, I'm okay with. But yeah, number 2, their debut album. On to number 1. Number 1, Feats Don't Fail Me Now. This is an almost perfect album. It's the first album I heard from them, which is, I still think it would be my favorite if it wasn't my first. But I only listened to this for like probably a year. I didn't even try to get other Little Feat albums. This was in like mid-'80s, so they weren't rejoining. They weren't getting back together. As far as I was concerned, they were a band that was not going to make new music. My stepdad had the vinyl. I looked at the awesome cover, put it on, loved it from the get-go, played it over and over and over again. And then it wasn't until I was at a Dead show, probably like a year later, and they played Dixie Chicken during the intermission, and I had heard it a couple times on another intermission, but at this point I was like, wait a minute, that's Lowell George's voice. And I was like, and I asked somebody, is this Little Feat? And it was. And so then I went and got that album and went down that rabbit hole for a while. wasn't able to get into the new Little Feat, as I mentioned earlier. But this album is just ridiculous. It opens up with Rock and Roll Doctor, a really just ultra funky kind of Lowell George doing as many things musically as he can. When they would play it live, he would add even more elements to it to just funk it up more. But it's got a great, funky, just celebrating music type lyric. Just a lot of fun, a lot of funk. Great opening song. And it's followed by Bill Payne's Oh Atlanta, which is probably not the best Bill Payne song that he's written. That's probably Snakes on Everything. But it's a little too cheesy for me. I think normally if it had come on a later album, it would be like, but it works so perfectly after Rock and Roll Doctor. It's almost like you need that just more simple, oh, Atlanta, just like feel good celebration type song after the crazy funk that was Rock and Roll Doctor. And then Fred Breyer follows that up with, by far, I think his finest song, Skin It Back, which is just Little Feat doing some really good funk. The Skin It Back referring to groupies discovering that he wasn't circumcised, or so I have read. It's just got this really great, like, just funky guitar part, and his delivery is almost Lowell George-ish, and the skin it back, just feel some excellent slide guitar work in there. That's a whole other thing I think I've failed to mention so far is the awesome slide guitar work throughout all of these albums. So then you get Skin the Back, and then as soon as that starts to fade out, you get probably Little Feat's best song, I'm going to argue, Down the Road, which in the first like 30 seconds, it starts off with this amazing like just drum beat intro. And then you drop into the song, and immediately this slide guitar comes in, and just like, oh man, that slide sounds good. And then the piano player comes in with this like amazing piano riff. So already the drummer, the slide guitar player, the piano player have just like made a mark on the song. And then right before they go into the lyrics, the vocals, the bass player is like just makes this little like run, and it's like all of a sudden he's up the level, and then Lowell George just drops in with one of the greatest sets of lyrics he's ever written. There's no chorus verse, it's just his tail. I guess I better meet you down the road. It pretty much sounds like this was their road album, and he's either got a groupie or a mistress or somebody who's only in this city, and hey man, I'm only, it's pretty much about, I think, living life on the road and having women in different places. I think the final lines are, come over here and try to get me off, won't you please me? Those aren't their final lines, but that's kind of how the song ends. It's just an amazing lyric, a weird little psych funk thing in the middle, like an interlude between like the last lyrics and the finale, just phenomenal. You think that's going to be like the best part, and then right after that, it's not a disappointment. They drop into the song Spanish Moon, which has probably one of the greatest intros, one of the greatest bass riffs. Horns come in, the best use of horns you're going to hear. One of the best uses of horns ever in music. Excellent lyrics, great delivery by Lowell George, amazingly funky song. That's side one. Side two, Feats Don't Fail Me Now, is kind of a little bit of a disappointment, kind of a cheesy song, but it's okay. And then The Fan, there is a line, the S hits the fan, but the song is pretty much about a groupie, so the title kind of works both ways. Kind of a groupie who gets used by a pop star and gets an infection after her lewd rejection. Again, great lyrics delivered in a completely weird, unique, funky Lowell George style. A nice little jam in the middle with like a slide guitar and keyboards that builds up to a nice little frenzy. And then peaks and then finishes off with some more amazing lyrics. And then the album closes with the medley of Cold, 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 and an even slower, groovier, funkier version, jamming its way into Tripe Face Boogie. That has now a little spacey section added in the middle, which like explodes into an amazing slide guitar solo where somebody's just like fighting their way up the neck of that guitar till they reach the highest notes possible, and then the song concludes. It's an almost perfect album. Probably the most perfect thing Little Feat has made. My number one favorite Little Feat album. check these out. If you have not checked out Little Feat, start with number one. It's the best. And if you do like them and you get familiar with them, the Hoy Hoy compilation thing they did after Lowell George passed away, it has like alternate takes, live takes that weren't released, some just regular studio versions, some songs that weren't released, is a treat. There's one huge clunker, a Bill Payne song called Gringo that is horrible, but everything else on there is pretty interesting and worth checking out. And some of the songs, there are live versions or alternate versions of some of the songs in these albums that are just spectacular. And that Linda Ronstadt, All That You Dream, is on there as also. There's a live album called Waiting for Columbus that I'm not a big fan of. I know there's a lot of live shows out there on YouTube that you can just listen to the entire show. It's not a bad live album, but it's a late stage live album. Focuses a lot on like those later albums. But yeah. It's interesting. But anyways, that's it. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Comment if you've checked out Little Feat before, if you do because of this, and let me know what you think and all that stuff. Peace, subscribe, and bye.